Just going to give it a second to make sure that all systems are a go. We have everything working. All right, I believe we are live and we've just gotten our final panelists just come in. Welcome, Darin.
Hi there.
Thank you so much for coming in. So I guess we'll get started. Welcome everyone to the Careers in Aerospace panel from the Aerospace Futures Online events. Aerospace Futures is the flagship event of the AYAA and is usually annually held in Australia, but this year is hosted online through a series of events. So this is just the latest installment. My name is Megan. I'm an aerospace engineering student from Monash University, and I will be the MC this evening. We have a fantastic lineup of panelists, as you can see all around me today, from a very wide range of backgrounds. So I'll let them introduce themselves. We'll start off with you, Brock. Can you tell us a little bit about your kind of university background, a bit about your career and where you are now?
Yeah, sure. Hi, everyone. My name's Brock. I'm lucky enough to go first in introducing myself here. So I graduated from UQ in 2017 with a Bachelor and Masters of Aerospace Engineering. So after that, I went straight on to start a job at Helimods. If you haven't heard of them before, they are a small to medium enterprise based up on the Sunshine Coast in Caloundra, and they do specialist modifications and mission systems for aircraft fleets, mainly in defence, in emergency services, and in other different forms around the globe. So I've been there for nearly 3 years now. And probably my career highlight so far has definitely been working on a police fit out, which we did, and getting to fly around in police helicopters for Victoria. So that was pretty cool.
Fantastic. Imogen.
Hi everyone, my name's Imogen Ray and I am currently coming to you live from Canberra, where I work for the Department of Industry, Science, Energy and Resources. So in that department, I am a senior policy officer and work on cybersecurity and critical technologies. So prior to that, I used to be heavily involved in the AYAA once upon a time with Brock and Seb. And after I'm a Monash grad, and after I graduated during my degree, actually, I worked for the SASIC for Spatial Information, now called Frontier SI, and then moved to Canberra for Geoscience Australia, where I worked on the satellite-based augmentation system. And now I'm at the department. Yeah.
Fantastic. All right, and Daniel.
Thanks, Megan. So good evening, everyone. My name's Daniel Edginton-Mitchell. I'm the course director for aerospace engineering at Monash University. And amongst my other roles, I'm also our rep at Women in Aviation and Aerospace and on the university's Athena Swan Diversity Committee. I did my undergrad at Monash and my PhD in gas dynamics at Monash and a Fulbright fellowship at Stanford in the High Temperature Gas Dynamics Laboratory. And now I'm in a teaching and research position. My research is primarily concerned with supersonic jet noise and high-speed flight. Career highlight, I got into aerospace because I wanted to be an astronaut or work at NASA. Obviously, Monash, as good as we are, not quite NASA, but I did get to give a talk at NASA Glen a couple of years ago. So that felt like coming a little bit close to my goal in a way. So either that or seeing one of my PhD students graduate would be career highlight. Thanks.
Fantastic. Cathy.
Hello everyone, I'm Cathy Riach from BAE Systems. My background's a little bit different to the other panellists. I am actually not an engineer, but I work with lots of engineers. BAE Systems is a very interesting place to work. I actually joined on a 9-month contract 19 years ago. So I like to tell people I joined when I was 4 years old because obviously I couldn't be that old. Really interesting place to work. My role, and because the reason I'm still there is things keep changing, new projects, lots of different comings and goings, which has kept us on our toes. So my role is as the enterprise resourcing lead. So the focus of that role, and I've had many different roles at Systems. This role is about our end-to-end resource management. So that's because we're a project-based organisation. So working with and helping our business better plan for the skills and the talents that they need, and then our team helps them with solutions to get those people. Career highlights over 19 years with BAE Systems, there's been many. I've been really fortunate to see our operations numerous times overseas. I don't get there very often anymore. Love going to Newcastle, where we maintain fast jets. So deep down, I am I'm an engineer on the inside, I'm sure of it. But my joy is working with hiring technical people, seeing them develop. And so, yeah, I'm in the alliance, I guess.
Fantastic.
And my studies were actually Adelaide University and then University of South Australia in industrial relations and HR. And that's me.
Thank you, Cathy. Darin.
Yeah, good evening, Megan. Thank you for inviting me. I love the work that you guys do. I think it's fantastic. I'm Darin Lovett. I'm currently the Director of Space for the South Australian Space Industry Centre, where I'm focused on bringing disruption and leveraging industry and what's happening in the new space sector to build an ecosystem in South Australia. My career is pretty diverse. I've had a long time in defence. I won't mention the years because it makes me look really old, but I've done capability development, and I've been lucky enough to sort of have 3 careers in Air Force. So I've done weapons flight test. I've been a P3 navigator and done flying operations, systems acquisition, and then my last sort of 10 years in Air Force was space operations, which is where my passion lies and which leads me to my current job. Space-wise, I've done some time in the Pentagon, which is a big policy area, and also chief of the Australian Space Operations Centre, but now trying to build the industry here in Adelaide. And university-wise, mixed bag. I started as an engineer, aerospace, but I sort of diversified, and I would encourage any engineer to cross the stream. I've also got a Master of Science, Master of Arts, and a Master of Philosophy, which somebody said to me I just couldn't sort out a PhD, which is actually true. I'm not good enough for that. But you know, broad experience, and my career highlight, I think, was being in Woomera for the last Hayabusa recovery. I was out in the desert with a bunch of camera crew and saw that thing burn in. And I've had a long career and history of Woomera with my stepfather there, my father there, myself there flying, doing flight test, and then doing space. So yeah, I love that place. Thanks, Megan.
Darin, I actually lived up there for a number of months when we had a period of work. So, but it would have been very different from when you lived there. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a great place.
Woomera is, yeah, definitely an amazing place. And we'll go to Sebastian, last but not least.
Hey guys, so I worked with Imogen and Brock also in AYA, but I graduated from UQ with a
Sorry,
bachelor
Sebastian, I
and
might need
master's.
you to speak up a little bit.
Yep. Sorry. I graduated UQ with a bachelor and master's in aerospace engineering. I used to work with Brock and Imogen in AYAA, and during my time at uni, I was with Boeing Defence Australia for about 3 years before I decided I should shake things a bit, and I moved down to Adelaide to work for the startup Myriota. And basically, I'm a spacecraft and missions engineer. And right now, they've sort of put me in charge in making sure that our satellites behave as intended, and then they survive their lifetime. So I think this is my career highlight at the moment. So yeah, pretty excited to be here.
Fantastic. Well, as you guys can see, we have an incredibly diverse panel here with a wide range of backgrounds and experiences. So hopefully they'll be able to answer any and every question that you have. Feel free to chuck any questions in the chat on Facebook, specify who you'd like to ask, you know, whether it's everyone or just 1 or 2 panelists, and we'll see if we can get around to it. I'm going to start with a question to you, Imogen, which is what motivated you to go into the public service?
Yeah, fantastic question. So I kind of landed into the public service by working for a CRC. So that's a cooperative research centre. And so what they do is bring academia, government and industry together to work on very specific industries and projects that would stimulate that industry. So I was working for the CRC for spatial information, and we were actually contracted to work on the downstream aspects of the satellite-based augmentation system. And so what we were trying to do is basically prove a business case to government that it would be worth investing in a system like this. And so halfway through my time there, the project got up and government announced it in their budget. And from there, obviously they needed lots of staff to then procure and acquire this system. And I moved to Canberra for Geoscience Australia, who was the agency in charge of procuring SBAS. So that's kind of how I landed in government. But I was particularly attracted to the SBAS project and sort of made the move interstate for it because it has such an amazing public good aspect to it. And that is, you know, one reason that a lot of people are attracted to work for the Australian Public Service. And particularly in a project delivery role as well, you really get to see and understand the users that you're having impact on. And how such a large, complex system can really impact people on the ground. So that was really why I was attracted to move to Canberra to work for the public service. But then after being an engineer in GA for a little bit, I sort of worked out that there's quite a lot more to government than just sort of an offshoot science agency of 650 people, and really wanted to get my head around what the Australian Public Service actually does and move to a more central agency to get a feel for how public money is spent and all of the sort of machinations it goes through to fund a project like SBAS and all of the other amazing things that you know, public infrastructure can do. So then I moved to the Department of Industry, Science, Energy and Resources, which is quite a mouthful now. Since the MOG. So yeah, so we do a whole range of different things. And a lot of people are surprised to know that our department actually has CSIRO and Geoscience Australia and IP Australia and ANSTO, and quite a lot of scientific agencies actually fall under our umbrella. So there is quite a lot of scope to move and do technical work and non-technical work all across just in our department. And then obviously mobility is incredibly good in the APS. So moving from departments like mine into defence and into places like DST is actually a lot easier than people might think from the outside. So yeah, that mobility is sort of something that's definitely keeping me in the APS because I can see a really long career going between technical and non-technical roles here.
Fantastic. That's fantastic to hear about that. You don't often hear about, you know, the intricacies of the Australian Public Service and actually how it's structured. So it's very interesting to get an insight into that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Remaining on the topic of kind of the public service, I want to open this up to both Imogen and Darin. What do you think are some of the pros and cons associated with working for APS or defence?
Imogen, you going to go first, or?
No, you go ahead, Darin.
Okay, look, I'll talk about. I've been both in government through defence. Also had some time in Boeing, but also now in back in government in the public service areas. So it's interesting. You know, I think a lot of people would say defence. Defence really is the profession of arms. So if you're going to go into defence, you have to be willing to trade some of your freedoms or your expectations around what a job might be in order to do potentially nasty things to other people. But that said, as a career, it can be quite good in terms of just normal progression and activity. So, and it also gives a lot of people surety. You know, unlike the US, which is a very much an up or out system, our defence force, it's pretty much as long as you're doing an okay job, and I hate to sound like it's mediocrity, but it can be, you know, people will have a career. And then in the public side, again, I guess it's that sense of as a career, it can offer you some long-term aspects about security, which is pretty important in COVID times. But I would say the fundamental thing for me, and one of the reasons I went from Boeing back to government, is a sense of service. And so I like contributing to this nation. I like building policy and trying to create things that you couldn't do it in industry, where like, Sebastian's working hard to make a startup work, and he's doing the hard yards of, trying to build an industry that's very important but small. One of the things I like about working in government is you get to work across all sectors to try and bring something to bear. So that's what makes it interesting for me.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the breadth of the work that the Australian government does is incomparable to sort of any other area that you might go into, and having the ability to work across so many different things is really fantastic. I think one of the downsides, I guess this isn't with every public service job, but it definitely is with mine and probably yours too, Darin. Not being able to talk about your work very much, I think, is often quite tricky. Going home at night and, talking to my partner, what did you do today? Ask me in a couple of months' time and I'll tell you all about it, I think is a bit tricky. But, a lot of you who are in defence context can probably appreciate that. But otherwise, yeah, I think it's really the breadth of the opportunities that government can offer that I find most attractive about working for the public service.
Fantastic. I'll direct the next question to both Brock and Sebastian. You guys started at fairly large companies and have actually since moved to fairly small ones. I wanted to understand a little bit about what prompted that change and what are some of the biggest differences that you can tell between these two types of companies.
I'll go first. So I think the reason why I decided to make the move was mainly because my mentor at Boeing, my manager, he noticed that I had applied somewhere else and I had gone for an interview, and he said, "Seb, like, what are you looking to do?" And it's like, well, it's a space startup, and I want to see how I go. And it's like, look, the startup is going to be a vertical learning curve, and ever since I've arrived at Myriota, it has been a vertical learning curve. And he said to me, he's like, those are going to be the years where you learn the most in the shortest amount of time. And he could not have been more correct. In the last couple of weeks, like, I've been pumped with work, and I think that's why I decided to make the move. Not that Boeing wasn't giving me work or anything like that. They were giving me heaps of work, but I think I wanted to put myself in an uncomfortable situation, something that's completely challenging for me, where I actually don't know many of the things I need to know to do the work. So I have to learn and complete tasks. But yeah, I think one of the main reasons is to challenge myself in an uncomfortable position, and just, I guess, dip my toe in a different pond early in my career while I can.
Yeah, I could not agree more with Sebastian there about it being a vertical learning curve, and you're essentially drinking from a fire hose, is how I like to refer to it. So that was definitely my experience starting at Helimods. Even they were basically, by the time I joined, they had gone from a startup into an SME, essentially, going into the next growth phase. And yeah, the work is, it's a high workload and you're learning a lot, but also as an engineer, you're growing a lot, and diversifying yourself too, because naturally the company is small. So you'll find that you will be exposed to all the different business areas of the company. And because Helimods itself is a vertically integrated workplace, like, we've got design, we've got production, we've got simulation, we do sales to customers, all that kind of stuff, and also integration on the hangar floor. So you're exposed to all those different areas, and you can talk to the production staff and the aircraft maintenance engineers, and work on the aircraft themselves. So yeah, there's a lot to learn, but that's what I find really beneficial about a startup or an SME. And that was in contrast to what my experience was having my internship at a aerospace prime in Australia. So I found that at the time there, it was an internship. So obviously I wasn't expecting to work on the craziest stuff, but I think team culture there was a thing I learned. It's like, wow, that's really important to me. I really value team culture and also the variety of work that I do. So I like doing something different every day and yeah, enjoying and getting along with a team of individuals who are like myself, really passionate about their work, passionate about aviation and space. And I got that vibe when I had my interview at Helimods. So that's why I transitioned over.
Apologies, guys. I think I just lost my internet. Am I back?
back.
I caught some snippets of that. What I caught was great, so thank you for bearing with me. I'm going to jump along to Cathy. Obviously, you come from the largest company of any of the representatives here. I wanted to get your opinion on, you know, how do you think working in such a large multinational company affects people's experiences and their career opportunities?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I think there's pros and cons, right? And I think it's really interesting to hear from Brock and Seb about, you know, having experienced the big company culture into a small company. In a small company, or small project, you can potentially touch lots of different life cycles of that project or that piece of work. So therefore, from a development perspective, you know, there's nothing better than that. In a really big program, all right, think about buildings, you know, 30 years worth of shipbuilding. That's so where was cut steel in 2022, and we were, you know, there'll be thousands of people who work on that. Some of whom, if they wanted to, you could run your whole career on one project, which, you know what, seems a bit scary to me because I like a bit more variety, but that option does exist there. So I think it is quite different. But it all comes down to what your own passion is and being self-driven. But I think as a young engineer, you should be grasping at lots of different opportunities. I remember back in the day, one of our really big projects, Project Wedgetail, which is an airborne early warning receiver, an AWAC. We had tons of graduates work on that program, right? And it was high profile and they had good experience, but because it was so large that I think for some of them it probably was an injustice that they weren't moved more often because they weren't getting broader exposure to different life cycles of a project. And software, you know, software in one project will be different to software in another. So I think, you know, you've got to put your hand up and be self-driven. But one of the things that we've done to address all of that, it was a complete overhaul of our graduate program so that there are rotations. Now, you might rotate within the same program, but it'll be to a different segment. So you'll be learning something different. So I think, you know, the advantage is we have lots of projects because we are so diverse as well. Aerospace is one, maritime projects, land-based projects. So as an engineer in our organisation, I mean, we have aerospace engineers who work in maritime and work in land-based programs. So they utilise their experience because they can use that into mechanical engineering type roles and it's vice versa. So I think the variety of work is there, most definitely. That is the key advantage. But you need to be careful that you don't get swallowed. And if you get swallowed and get a bit stuck, then that will potentially limit the rate at which you'll learn and grow.
Fantastic. Oh, I hope my internet's maintaining. Thank you so much, Cathy. I'm going to move along to Dan now, and we've got quite a few questions coming in on this topic. So, Daniel, you have the largest experience with postgraduate studies, both in your career and in your job. What opportunities do postgraduate studies provide to graduates?
Thanks, Megan. So a question that you know that I like to talk about and address some misconceptions about. So we consistently have conversations with our students who say things like, oh, I don't want to do a PhD because I don't think I want to work in academia, to which we say, good, you won't. There's, you know, 4% of undergrads do a PhD and 1% of those go into academia. you can imagine I'm planning to work in this position for the next 40 or 50 years, and I'll graduate probably 60 or 70 PhD students in that time, and the university sector isn't exactly growing right now. So the majority of the time, if you're doing a PhD, it's not because you want to end up doing the sort of job I'm doing, though it is a pretty wonderful job. It's because you want to get the kind of specialist training that will allow you to tackle different roles. It's not about it giving you an advantage in getting a job or even necessarily getting a better job. It's about getting a different job. And if you look at a lot of the large, multinational aerospace companies, a lot of their research and development work is led by people with PhDs. In my area, aeroacoustics, there are people there from Lockheed Martin and Boeing and Airbus and others, and they all have done postgraduate study. I think if you're trying to decide where to go in your career and you're looking to work in either Europe or the United States, there's generally an expectation there to be competitive, you will at least have a master's. It's not a hard and fast rule. Of course, there are always exceptions to that. I think a lot of the time they don't realize how good our undergrads are. And I'm not just saying that out of patriotism, but the Australian undergrad program is certainly more demanding than the American undergrad program, even at a leading university. So they don't realize how qualified you are, but often the perception matters more than the reality. So if you're going up with your undergraduate degree against someone with a master's degree from a university that has, better name recognition, it's a difficult sell. So if you want to work in, a lot of those companies in Europe or the States, you'll at least want to pursue a master's or 4 masters, apparently in Darin's case. So that's one reason you might do it, but it's to develop a different skill set that, will enable you to undertake different kinds of work. You might even work in the same company that you would if you'd gone straight in as a grad, but you might be in a different, more analytical role. So a PhD, even though it's very specialized in one topic, it's not your expertise in that topic that you take to the marketplace afterwards. I mean, my PhD was in one particular sound production mechanism of supersonic jets. And if I went to Cathy and asked for employment, I don't think I would find a great reception for expertise in that topic. But, I designed, built, tested equipment. I did advanced measurements on it. I did advanced mathematical analysis on it. I learned to write about it, talk about it. So it's just a skill training program, but it's a very specific set of skills that opens up a specific set of opportunities. And you should do one, Megan.
Yeah, for context, Daniel is trying to convince me to do one at the moment. So this strategically for me to really hear his answers here. But we have had a question from the audience on this topic, which is what are the positives and negatives of going straight into higher study from an undergraduate degree?
Okay, also an excellent question. The main positive of going straight into it after your undergraduate degree is that you'll actually do it. Because if you don't go straight into it, you probably, statistically speaking, will never go back. For the simple reason that human beings tend to expand to whatever financial means they have. And if you're at the end of your undergraduate degree and you've had a good undergraduate degree, you could probably get a scholarship to do postgraduate study if you stay in Australia. That's 30 grand tax-free. That looks pretty good if you've been working at Coles at the checkout line during your undergraduate degree. If you've been at BAE for 5 years, and Cathy can speak to what you might expect to have at BAE after 5 years, but I guarantee it's a lot better than 30,000 even if it's tax-free.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you hear a lot, oh, I'm going to go to industry and I'll come back in 5 years and do a PhD. And we say, yeah, sure. See you when you get back. And of course, it's extremely rare. There may be exceptions to that where the company sponsors you to go back. And certainly if you go through DST, for instance, I've got a colleague who's just been sponsored to go back and do his PhD, but that's after 15 years in the role. So, don't think that the company, you'll impress them so much that they'll sponsor you to leave for 4 years in 2 years' time. So, obviously there are advantages for your personal development to go out and see what industry is like and better understand why you might want to do postgraduate study. But realistically, the financial considerations mean if you want to do one, if you want to do a PhD or a master's, the time that you can most afford to do it. And in fact, the only time where it will be an increase in your standard of living is if you do it straight out of undergrad. You know, you imagine you're out for 5 years and maybe you settle down, you're getting married, you're putting a deposit down on a house, and then you say, honey, I'm going to take an 80% pay cut. How do you feel about overtime? I hope you're a good negotiator.
Fair enough, fair enough.
I'd just probably add to that, actually, that you mentioned DST, so another organisation that is part of the Australian Public Service. And so the APS is really generous in terms of their study leave and their policies around sponsoring PhDs and that kind of work. So although I think it's a fantastic idea to do it straight out of uni, if that's not the decision you have made, know that there are plenty of areas in the, particularly in the Australian Public Service, where they will pay you full time to go and do your PhD. They will pay you study leave and pay for your masters and plenty of other degrees and learning opportunities that they're more than willing to pay for. So at the moment, I'm studying my Masters of Systems Engineering through my job. Yeah.
Very nice. That actually is a good answer to a question that we have here as well, which is to all the young professionals on the panel, are you ever considering doing higher studies? So we know Imogen is currently undertaking it. Brock, Sebastian, are either of you considering it?
Yeah, so I guess I'm speaking for Seb here too, but we both did the integrated master's program at UQ. So for those that don't know what that is, or considering it even if you're watching from UQ, basically it's a program where at the end of your third year, you can elect to, I guess, take an extra year on top of your bachelor's degree, which is generally 4 years, to then come out with an integrated Bachelor of Engineering and Master of Engineering. So your master's placement can be organized through UQ at one of the research labs or in industry. So your thesis is essentially a 6-month-long full-time thing that you can work on in your 5th year. And then at the end, you come out with the master's degree, which, as the other panelists have said, makes you internationally competitive with Europe and the US. So for me personally, that's why I did the master's degree, because I wanted to keep all my options open in Europe and the US. So I was like, yeah, I want to be internationally competitive. And that's why I chose it.
Do you have anything to add, Seb?
I think he pretty much hit it there on the nail. And I think the thing that I would add is that if you're really tossing up between not doing a master's because you want to go get industry experience, an extra year or even 2 years for a normal master's really does pay off, because you do get put into the top of the top. You are very competitive, and if you're sitting on the fence, this is your sign. Do it.
I might just add as well on that, because I think it's a good point about the extra 2 years. You know, we get people say, oh, you know, I don't want to enter the workforce so late. Your generation will be lucky to retire by 75. Like, if you really think that extra 2 years delay or 3 years or 4 years to a PhD, like that's going to matter at the end. I know that it from where you are now, it might seem like a long extra commitment, but you know, in the arc of your career and the length of time you're likely to work in this industry, I mean, I won't say how long it took me to get my PhD because it might turn everyone off, but it doesn't matter. It's a small fraction of the time you'll spend in the industry.
I think we've got one last question on this topic before we kind of find something else, which is directed to Cathy. Obviously, we've heard about transferable skills from PhD, but we want some people have asked to hear from your perspective, from a more HR recruiting perspective. How are these transferable skills perceived at BAE?
Well, definitely perceived well. And I mean, I will just echo Daniel's comment there about the time. I know it feels at the time, I've been in university for 4 years, 5 years. I just want to earn some real money, but it isn't much longer. And I'll tell you, from my seat, you are far more competitive when we are taking applications. So whilst it still might be into a graduate program, the number of applications that we get, and I'm sure other organisations get, is just through hundreds and hundreds for a very small number of roles, really. So anything that you can do that stands out. So I think it shows from a, what does it tell us? Well, it tells us what your passion is. If that is aligned to the work that we do or the organisation that you're applying for, then that's absolutely fantastic. So I know that we've seen applicants who, they're not just, they're giving us some detail on what they did in their PhD. And that can actually help to say, oh my gosh, they will be fantastic in X project or in this particular area. So it is really something that kind of makes you a bit stickier to us and to the hiring managers in terms of your technical interest. But also it does tell us that you can really apply yourself, that you're serious about your craft. So I think it tells us a lot about you as an individual, not just that you're good at study, but it tells us what you're really passionate about. And that is what we want to see. And when we get so many applications, that type of thing will absolutely stand out.
Fantastic. I'm sure many people will be very happy to hear that. All right, Darin, the next question is for you. You mentioned in your introduction about the benefits of kind of crossing the streams in relation to your education and your experience. People asking if you could elaborate a little bit more on that. Why is that beneficial and why would you recommend it?
Oh, look, great. I love talking about this topic. Look, when I started as an engineer, I loved what I was doing. I was doing aerospace engineering. I came from a sort of a STEM background. I was heavy in physics, chem, maths, and also had to do the obligatory English, which I found quite bizarre. But engineering is very structured, and because of the content that you have to do, I find that our stovepipe set up around our educational systems, need a bit of disruption. So if you look overseas, which I've spent at least a decade in the US, they're moving, and also Europe, they're moving far more to interdisciplinary degrees. And so engineering, you need some core skill sets there. But I believe that there is definitely room in an engineering degree in Australia to do a little bit more cross-sectional activity. That's not happening. So at the moment, what you have, and I know you, Megan, started with some drama and arts background, and you moved into engineering. What it brings, I think, is the ability to critically think. So while you're mired in the morass of engineering mathematics and trying to get your next exam out and work out how to keep smoke in a box, otherwise the electronics stop working. What the arts gives you is that ability to sort of critically think across a range of areas. And so for me, it was the humanities first. I did a lot of IR, international relations, and politics, and then moving into philosophy. So that ability to pull together and draw on the world's best thinking and then bring it to what you're doing in, say, a technical stream is critically important, because if anything, everything we do is human. And so I find if you get the classic engineering approach, which might lack that human context or the social context, it typically ends in a failed project. And so one thing I also learned as a project manager, when I did my Master's of Science in the US, I had a project management teacher, and he said the worst people for project managers are engineers. He said, what you want is someone who understands humans, who understands people and can work across and connect. So, that's a lesson for all of us. We are a human species. We have a big amygdala, and we've got a reptilian brain backset. So it's really important to understand how people work and how to connect, I think.
Fantastic. And I mean, Darin, you know about this already. For those tuned in, keep your eyes peeled. The AYAA is starting a new program in this kind of cross-disciplinary space, which is going to provide students in both STEM and humanities fields to really work together on aerospace topics. So keep your eyes peeled for that. It's going to be very exciting. A question kind of for everyone, I guess, just jump in if you have an opinion on this, such as many aspiring engineers dream of kind of working overseas. They think about NASA, they think about SpaceX. Did any of you consider working internationally? And if so, why did you stay in Australia? Yeah, Daniel?
I was planning to move to the US from the time I was about 8, which is when I decided I wanted to either be an astronaut or work at NASA. I married an American girl to sort out my citizenship issues. It's not why I married her. I married her because she's amazing, but certainly that was, I was planning to marry an American even before I met my wife. But why did we in the end as a family unit decide to move back here? Because we wanted to live in a place with healthcare and education and quality of life. And there are many advantages to being in the Australian ecosystem, both, you know, socially, but even in academia in Australia is a great place to work. We're a bit more free than they are in the US, and we're a bit better paid than they are in Europe. So there's advantages to working here. And I'm too tall to be an astronaut.
Has anyone else considered working in the US?
Well, one of the things I've noticed, because one of my friends in the US, after going on exchange, did mention that some companies over there that work on satellite offer international students or international graduates to come on and, you know, check out their programs and everything. And I think the reason why I stayed within Australia was because things are starting to get exciting in Australia for the space industry and the aerospace industry in that fact. And I don't know about you, but things are ramping up here. I wouldn't necessarily want to go over there where things sort of have, you know, plateaued a little bit. So Australia seems to be ramping up. So I think if you want to stay around here, I would definitely recommend it.
Yeah, Megan, could I say something too?
Absolutely.
Yeah, look, when I left school, if you wanted to be an aerospace engineer and get some background in, you know, thermodynamics or engine performance or structures, you really had to go overseas or get one of the very few select jobs in perhaps GSTG. Things are changing, and, you know, one of the reasons I think that it's so exciting now, especially for my focus area of space, is that there's a critical mass occurring in Australia right now where you can actually have a career. You can do a degree in, say, Adelaide, and then move into a space company, just like Sebastian's doing, and actually build stuff, and that it's world class. And so part of the problem, I think, is we suffer from confidence. We look to the US and we look to Europe, we think that they have it all. But as Daniel said before, our degrees are world class. And I've seen it in the US, you know, there's a grab for degrees. It's part of your initiation into any business, as, you know, you're expecting a master's, etc., to move forward. But I find often the quality of those degrees is questionable. So, you know, I think for Australia, we've got best country in the world to live in, you know, 12th richest country in the world. We're low on innovation and technology. We need to bring that up as a benefit for the future, for future kids and for society. So, you know, if you can build on the degrees here and then move into an industry that's rapidly growing, that's really awesome. I think it's something to be considered. Or go overseas and then come back. Boomerang.
Fantastic. All right, well, we'll move on to the next question, which is a very broad one, but always something that people are keen to hear about, which is, what is something that you wish you had known before entering your chosen career path? So shoot it out to anyone. Brock, do you want to kick us off?
An interesting one.
I'll have a go.
So is Seb talking?
Yeah. If you're planning to work in anything space related, or, well, I mean, engineering in general, even if you're doing electrical, mechanical, do a bit of software. Teach yourself some kind of software. It is extremely relevant nowadays. And yeah, it's still to this day, and even last week, I kind of teaching myself Bash language. So if you can, while you're at uni, do a software engineering course if you can.
Fantastic. Darin, you had something to add?
Yeah, I had something to add. I think this came to me late. One of my the last job I did in the Air Force was as a university lecturer teaching humanities. So I went through the Australian Defence Force Academy learning engineering, and I came back as a humanities teacher in the School of Social Sciences. So a total 180 disconnect. the reason I went there is I read a book called Living Life Without a Goal by Ogilvy, that just before I took up that job. And the lesson I learned from that is that I think there are two ways to look at this world. There's the traditional classic Western constructivist way, which is, you work out where you want to go, you want to be the head of this or the head of that, and you reverse engineer and you deterministically apply yourself to those skills and attributes that will get you to along that path. And that's fine. But there is another path, and the other path is, keep on pursuing your dreams, keep on learning, but meander your way through life, and don't be so frightened about what might come next. If you're good, and I'll caveat that, if you're good, I'm not talking about being the best shelf stacker in Coles. I'm saying that, if you really have a desire to move through life and explore new things, then take the risk and do it. Australia is one of the best countries in terms of an insurance policy to do that. We do have fallback systems, and Daniel brought up as well. In the US is a harsh place. If you don't have a job, you don't have insurance, you don't have medical, your family can suffer. You can suffer. So, take some risks. Life is short.
I think that's outstanding, and I guess I'd just add something to that. Having had many final year students coming and saying that they don't know what to do with their lives and agonizing over sort of choice paralysis. A lot of the choices you're going to be faced with are not a choice between a good outcome and a bad outcome. When you're deciding whether to pursue this option or that option, it's not that down one path lies happiness and down one path lies unhappiness. I mean, when Imogen chose to go to Canberra amongst the options she had, it's not that if she hadn't done that, she'd be miserable now. Maybe it was the best possible choice. Maybe it wasn't. It doesn't matter. There's no prize at the end for having optimized your route. What matters is whether you can find satisfaction and enrichment in the path you take. So some people really suffer from choice paralysis. I think it's always valuable to sit back and say, it's not behind one door there's a new car and behind one door there's a goat, right? Although goats are pretty cool. It's between a range of good options, and don't second guess yourself about whether or not you're choosing the best one. That doesn't matter. Did you choose one that took you to happiness? Great.
Yeah, and I think I just add
I think I want to add to that is that
go ahead, Cathy.
Yeah, I was about to say, it's also not the only choice you're going to make. So if you think about, as young professionals, how many jobs you've already had, right? So, and I think the biggest regret will be to have a regret. Seize the opportunity. You know what? It actually might turn out to be a goat. Oh, well, guess what? You will have learnt something. You will meet new people. That will give you the leverage to the next opportunity. Learn something out of every experience, even if you've won yourself a goat, and think, okay, well, guess what? There is something to be learnt here. So I think maybe back in our grandparents' days, they made one choice. Maybe there were two places they could have gone to work, and they made one choice, and that was it. And if, it was the car or the goat, that's not the case now. And do things and then think, okay, I'm going to learn from this. It actually isn't giving me exactly what I thought it would, but in a couple of years' time, there will be some more options. And you also won't be presented with two options. You will be presented with lots of options. So take the best thing that seems for your learning and your development now, because you won't be there forever. And I mean, unless you join BAE Systems, of course, but no, but even that, we would, if you did, you do not want to be in the same place. You need to apply for different roles within the organisation. You have to put your hand up. And sometimes people will come and say, I've got an opportunity for you. And it can be as scary as all hell, because you think, I actually don't know. I don't even know if I can deliver that. If somebody asks you to do something, they believe that you can deliver it. So say yes. Don't regret that.
Yeah, I totally agree with all of the advice that's been given so far. I mean, if somebody had have told me in my final year that I would have been in Canberra working on policy, I would have thought that, that was pretty close to being my goat. But, it's been a really incredible experience, and it's been so diverse. Even just a couple of months ago, I was redeployed to source PPE into the country for a national crisis. and do so many different things. There are plenty of secondment opportunities. You know, I've spent all of this week at a different department working on a range of different things. And, you know, I guess the way that I thought about it when I made this move was I looked at space. You know, space is a real passion of mine. It's the industry that I do, you know, long-term want to go in and out of. And I looked at the space sector and looked at what skills I could get in the public service that would, you know, add another feather to my bow, going back into a technical role. So, you know, understanding how government tenders are assessed, which is a huge thing for the private sector. And, you know, understanding all these different emerging technologies. So working on quantum, working on AI, working on blockchain, you know, working with all of these different techs, which are going to be enabling to the space sector long term, and having that really broad understanding is really useful, even though I'm not in the space sector specifically. So really taking a broad understanding of where you want to go, and, you know, not necessarily having to go straight in to be a spacecraft design engineer or, you know, get the dream job straight out of uni, but thinking really broadly about the different types of skills that would be beneficial to you long term.
If anything, we're all going to remember now that when we make a choice, don't be frozen, don't be scared to make a decision, because even if it's a goat behind the door, it's going to be okay. There's opportunities everywhere, and I think that hopefully will stick in everyone's brain. Fantastic, thanks guys. I think that in choosing career paths, one of the most obvious discussions is what my job might entail. What is my tasks going to be? What am I going to learn? But most people who've been in the industry for a while, actually, when they're choosing jobs, there's a lot more to it than that. There's the goat. You know, there are really strong elements of company culture, and that can impact the way that you select jobs and how much you actually enjoy a job. Cathy, I was wondering if you could speak to, firstly, kind of what should undergrads and graduates be looking for in their employees in terms of the company culture?
Well, I guess first and foremost, in order to feel fulfilled and feel that what you're doing is worthy, you need to work for an organisation who has the same values that you have. Because you could work for the funkiest place who are doing the coolest tech. However, if their values don't align with yours, it won't be too long before you start to feel, wait a sec, whether it's they don't value diversity, or they don't value the safety and well-being of the people that work here, or it's actually an industry that does things that I don't like. So, I mean, as Darin mentioned earlier, some people do have an aversion to working in defence. Some people have an aversion to working for cigarette companies, for example. So if that really fights against your belief system, then it's not a great idea. You know, you'll be so tormented, you will torment yourself. So I think it's really important to ensure that where you go is aligned with your values. And I think at the end of the day, that's what's most important. And that speaks to the company's culture. And of course, go online and you'll see that every organisation talks to you about their culture and who we are and what we believe in. But ask people who work there. Check out reviews on SASIC and on other boards. What do people say when they go for interviews, when they leave the organisation? And that's where you'll glean a lot of information. But that's what I think is important. And that alignment of your values to where you work and what you do is more important than money. And it also might be, maybe it's not the coolest tech, but it actually feels so much better. And I think that's what's really important. I know that that's what drives me. My values are aligned with the values of BAE Systems, hence why I've stayed. And also so many different opportunities coming that I just keep saying yes to.
Fantastic.
Yeah, that's such a good point, Cathy. I think I might add to that too. It's like, look at SEEK, look at all the reviews online of the company, because definitely culture is very important. And also, if you get to the interview stage, use the interview to interview the company as well. Get a like do a
Yeah.
real big vibe check of what the company's like when you're in the office. Like walk around, look at what everyone's doing, talk to staff in the cafe, and just see how what they do with their jobs, if they enjoy it. Yeah, and even the interviewer as well. Definitely ask them about the company culture, because my values are, I said previously, I really value company culture, and I align well with the job I'm in now. And if you don't enjoy the job you're doing, then the day just goes so much longer. Like if you really enjoy the people you work with and the work that you do, then the day just goes by like that. And that's how you know that, yeah, you're in the right spot.
Company culture is something that I think a lot about during job applications, and I think your advice to interview the company back is what I consistently tell my friends to do as well when they're applying for jobs. I think it's very important. We have another general question, which is, what would be your best advice to early undergraduates who are looking for experience and opportunities to grow? Might start with you, Darin, if you have any advice there.
Cool. I was going to jump in on the last question. This one's a hard one. Look, networking, it came up in the last question. If you're going to look at a company, reach out and find people. I've done it myself. When I went to Boeing, I looked up on LinkedIn and I said, look, who do I know working in that area? And I had 18 contacts that I had. Literally, I didn't know they were working at Boeing, to be honest. I'd lost track of them. So I called a few people up and said, how is the company and what is the culture? Networking is critically important, and it may seem a little bit American or non-Australian, but in this world today, those personal relationships can make things happen. So I would say, get on LinkedIn and start using that to build up affiliations and interest groups, and see what the information flow is, whether it's LinkedIn, Twitter, or Facebook, or whatever. But that's a good area to go for as well. When you're starting. And the other thing is, I see it with you guys, like, Megan, some of the programs you run with AYAA is that sort of extra, putting in the yards to do something a bit different, to show that you're interested and motivated. And back to Cathy's point, I've been on the other side of recruiting panels where I'm looking at potential candidates. And I tell you, you can get someone who blitzes academics and has a great IQ, but if they don't have EQ, emotional intelligence, and they can't demonstrate that through their ability to show that they've been working in other areas, it's really hard to sort of work out how they're going to be placed. And you can have some real problems if you just take the best academically qualified person rather than someone who's sort of spread themselves around to do other things. So get out there. Get involved in clubs, if it's rocketry or science or making mice hair disappear, whatever it is. Do something a bit different and just show that you're passionate.
Anyone have anything else to add to that? All right. I think Darin must have touched on everything there. Kind of on that topic though, we've got 3 AIA alums on our panel tonight. And I did want to ask you guys, what about your experience working for organizations such as AIA do you think has benefited your career?
That's a very big question. I don't know where I begin. Maybe learning the roads, driving a minibus around Canberra, that's a good start. No, so I think all of the project management skills and stakeholder management skills and negotiation skills that you learn doing these kind of extracurriculars, you sort of don't really know you have them until you get into the workplace, and you realize that you're actually quite good at them relatively. I find that AYAA and those organizations are such a bubble of concentration of people who are really passionate and fantastic at what they do, that you sort of don't realize how exceptional you all are until you get out into the big wide world. So yeah, I think all of the disasters that happen in those kind of extracurriculars, they're fantastic examples in your interviews. You're always going to be asked about a challenging situation. Yeah, everything that you do there is so valuable. It's all of the stuff that's not technical, that, you know, Darin was saying, showing your EQ, being personable, and really showing to interviewers that you're a good cultural fit. And I think, you know, dealing with such an array of different people through clubs like AYAA and, you know, your motorsport club or your rocketry club, I think that's, you know, worth its weight in gold.
Yeah, so true, Imo. And also, yeah, definitely learnt the roads of Canberra and driving a minibus as well through my time with AR. But the amazing thing about organizations like the AYAA is that you could go from consoling a year 11 or 12 student at a school camp on their first time away from home, or consoling a parent over the phone who's like dealing with their kid away from home for the first time, to talking to international conglomerate CEO at the International Astronautical Congress, like in Adelaide, for my experience, and in Mexico. So the vast array of experiences that you get at organizations like this really contribute to your emotional intelligence, which is so important, I think, for engineers, especially because engineers can get very closeted in technical work, but once they get out to the non-technical side of things, it makes them really great, can get them into really great opportunities with project management and business development and things like that, because they've got those interpersonal skills that are so important that you need to have in those areas. And also the networking section, like the contacts you get through organizations like these and the people you work with form friends for life, form your networks, your peers that you can talk to at any point in time to see how they're going in industry. And you can see that even now with three of us alums are on the panel tonight. So it's great.
And I think I just add to that, Brock, like I've just lost what I'm going to say. Go, Seb.
I think in addition to everything that's been said, the fact that you generate close relationship with industry people is one of the most golden things about it. Like, you wouldn't believe it, but as a first year, as a second year being in AYAA, you know, you'd have a one-on-one conversation with Boeing leaderships, or Boeing leaders and BAE leaders, like people that are driving the industry, and they know you by name. So you can imagine when you come to an interview of that same company, the CEO or like the director will be like, oh yeah, I know Seb, he's a good lad. And that is just invaluable when it comes to progressing your career. So would definitely recommend it.
Yeah, I think what I was going to say was that, you know, at the end of the day, when people are looking at your CV, you've got, particularly for those who are listening to this that have got, you know, a STEM degree, you know, people are looking at this and they know you're smart. You've got a STEM degree, you know, to get through it, you've probably got relatively good grades. You know, you don't need to prove to them that you've got brains. What you need to prove to them is all of the other things that they're looking for. Those are the bits that you can't articulate as well on your CV, and you need you need these extracurriculars like AYAA to show that. You know, you don't want to have to just get into the interview or you know, only have your degree on your CV and make HR managers go looking for the interesting bits about you. You know, I think that's really important. You know, you just don't need to prove that you're smart once you've got the degree. It's all of the other stuff.
And I can assure you it absolutely stands out, as Imogen's point, on the applications, because it shows us, again, your passion, your interest, the commitment that you made, that you've probably got leadership skills, all of those other things that do go around with, well, yeah, got the degree, obviously brains in the head, but what else can we possibly get? And to the point about the industry connections, we've just been sitting here thinking about that. And I think, interestingly, a number of students that we will have met through associations, societies, etc., who are engaging us to come and present to their cohort, they've ended up working for us, because when they applied, I said, I know that girl. She was the so-and-so, da-da-da-da-da, and it absolutely has stood out.
So So for those of you who are listening going, my goodness, I need to get involved with the AYAA. Fortunately for you, the Australian University Rocket Competition will be recruiting a committee very soon. So that's a fantastic opportunity to be involved in one of the biggest space-based competitions in Australia right now. So keep your eyes peeled for that. Otherwise, the state committees are always looking for support. And if you can follow the AYAA Facebook page, you'll be sure to see many fantastic opportunities. Darin, I have a question specifically about your career, which is how did you transition from an engineering degree to being a pilot in the RAF?
Oh, well, just to clarify, I was a navigator, so that's like a second class citizen in the Air Force. But it was interesting. It was very difficult, to be honest. So I was brought in as an engineer, and I had to transfer categories which the Air Force doesn't like. They like you to stovepipe, and they've invested a lot into you. And it was a different mindset. I'll give you a couple of examples. When I was an engineer, as a weapons engineer doing design work, it would have been the worst thing in the world to have a calculation go wrong, that somewhere down the path that your analysis could cost money or risk safety. And yet when I went into the flying world, the operational world, I remember an instructor beating me over the head and saying, "Stop thinking." And he literally meant it. He said, "Stop thinking too much and start doing." And so I learned a lot out of that. It was an interesting area where one of my first flights as a qualified navigator, we came back after that and we sat down as a crew, and they're all very, personable, and they're saying, "Darin, it was a great flight. It was really good right up into the point where you almost killed everyone. And, luckily we stopped you doing that." And that was really hard to take. But I think that there are different worlds out there, and, it's important to understand that a flexible mindset is very important, and don't just think that the structure you've grown up in, is the be all and end all. There are very different perspectives, and I know you, Megan, have seen that through drama and whatnot. It is difficult to understand when you're stuck in a stovepipe or a career stream. But there are different cultures out there, and if you can blend them all, I think you become a more rounded person.
Yeah, I think that's always a common theme in a lot of our discussions, Darin, is really how important it is to step outside of your personal bubble, and it makes you better at whatever you're currently working on, just to have that kind of breadth of experience. It's very true. I have a question here about the international student job market. I feel like Cathy probably could talk to this a bit more, but any advice for any international students who are looking to enter the job market in Australia as an engineer? I think we may have lost Cathy.
Obviously, right at the moment, it's pretty limited. Oh, can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Hoping you can hear me. Excellent. Obviously, at the moment, things are pretty limited in COVID times, but outside of that, it is still a bit difficult. It's difficult in regards to, well, it depends on the industry as well. BAE Systems is 100% defence, so we can't employ international students because we can't get you a security clearance. So aim for organisations that don't have that type of requirement. Otherwise, you'll just be disappointed because there's nothing we can do about it. What you might be able to do is, depending on what country you're in, you may be able to work for a of that organisation, which might eventually give you the opportunity to move to that country. But I think that's important. Understand the requirements of the organisation that you're going for before you put all that effort and energy into your applications, because you might for us, it's just a brick wall and it's just impossible. From a visa perspective as well, depending on the number of students who are available in the market, it can also be very difficult to get a visa. So it doesn't mean it's impossible, but I think you just need to be really targeted in your search for industries and organisations who would be able to accommodate you.
Megan, can I comment too, just on that in terms of getting overseas? Can I mention a magical visa that only exists for Australians going to the US? So it's the E3 visa. It was created as a result of post 9/11 because Australia, jumped in and joined the war against Iraq. We got some special dispensations through the free trade agreement that came out of that. So the E3 visa, which is something that Canada and the UK have been desperately trying to get for years, is only available to Australians. And basically it exempts you from the usual processes of green cards and whatnot, and allows Australians to work in the US with very little typical regulatory oversight. So it's something worth looking at if you want to go and work in the US. A lot of US companies don't know it exists either. And so, you got to be forearmed to be able to approach a US company and say, hey, I can get to you. You just need to sign the dotted line, and I'll be there in a few weeks, COVID permitting, obviously.
Interesting advice. I just wanted to take a quick moment to mention as well, before we proceed, that we've only got about 15 minutes left. So if you have any last questions, please submit them now. But otherwise, we'll get back to it. Daniel, sorry, did you have something to add? No?
No, I was just sneezing.
Yes, that would do it. We have some just questions about the APS. So I guess Darin and Imogen again. What challenges did you face when starting at the APS, and what advice would you give to a young professional who's looking to enter that part of the sector?
Yeah, so the APS have an enormous graduate program. So that's one massive positive aspect, particularly in these times, that the APS will still absolutely be hiring. And in particular, we're needing surge capacity for a lot of task forces and all sorts of things during COVID as well. So absolutely, we have a really extensive grad program. Pretty much every department and every agency has some sort of grad program and hires quite a lot of people. So my department, we're about 2,800 people. I'm not sure how many more now that we've got energy and resources, but probably a few hundred more than that. And so, we hire graduates in sort of around the 50 to 70 mark every year, which is quite big. And we're just one department. So for graduates looking to get into the APS, absolutely apply. Going into any of the central departments like Prime Minister and Cabinet, Treasury, Finance, any of those will give you really broad skills to understand government and really understand all of the different departments and areas that you can go into as well. So that will give you a really broad understanding on the types of work that government does and the sort of things that you might be attracted to work in. In terms of barriers that I faced, obviously I had to move interstate. There are plenty of roles that you can work interstate for. So plenty of places. DST is an excellent example where they have offices in quite a lot of states and have a lot of personnel in each one. But I don't think that there were any other huge barriers other than that. I think, the APS is pretty generous. They pay for your relocation and all of those bits and pieces. So yeah, I think really the only barrier was just moving interstate for me.
Do you have anything to add, Darin?
Yeah, look, I wouldn't disagree with anything Imogen said. I'll probably just add a couple of just different perspectives I've had. So I sort of went from defence, which was sort of federal government, to state. So states very similar. State governments have the same requirements and oversight that federal has, just different jurisdictions. I think the most important thing to remember is that, if you are working for government, you are really there at the behest of the government of the day to do stuff on behalf of the country or the state. So you're expending taxpayer dollars, and that means you don't necessarily have the flexibility to go do what you want. If you've got a great idea, it may not matter if the government of the day's decision is that policy idea is not going to be progressed. So you've got to sometimes suck it up and work with ideas that you don't necessarily like as good stewards of the public purse. So that's important to remember. But that said, yeah, there is a lot of potential to make good things happen. It just can be difficult because it's a large bureaucracy. And the important thing there is, because you are using public monies, there is a fairly heavy oversight in terms of how those monies are expended. And that adds bureaucracy, it adds time, And it means that, often when if you're in private sector, you can move a lot faster. You're kicking at government saying, why can't you get this done? It's because there are a lot of checks and balances, and be prepared to wear those.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think in my experience, I've been, both on the project delivery side as well as on the policy side. So it really sort of depends how far along that string you are. I had a lot more autonomy, I suppose, working on a project delivery, and I'm much more at the behest of the minister when I'm working in a policy environment. So yeah, totally agree, but really depends on where you kind of how much at arm's length you are from the minister, I guess.
We have another question kind of throwing back to the postgraduate studies topic. So Daniel, I'll assume you can answer this, but anyone else feel free to jump in, which is, why would you recommend a PhD rather than a master's degree to a student? What are the main advantages of a PhD over a master's?
So, I mean, if we're talking about a master's, you've first got to split it into a coursework master's as opposed to a research master's. So a master's of engineering science as opposed to the many different names coursework masters have. So a coursework master's is simply the same sort of thing you did in undergrad, but a bit harder and a bit more specialized. There may be a capstone project involved in it, but you're doing a bunch of courses, you're doing a bunch of advanced specialist courses, but it's the sort of thing you're used to, but just harder and more of it. Masters by research and a PhD are both research-based with minimal coursework components. The fundamental differences between them, the way we tend to describe it in our department is a Masters by research trains you to do research, a PhD trains you to lead research. And amongst the differences, a PhD has a requirement that you make a novel and significant contribution to the body of knowledge. A Master's of Science has no such requirement. So you can just do a project as long as it's difficult and you show some skill development, you can get a Master's for it. To be granted a PhD, it has to be a novel and significant contribution. Now, how significant some of those are, you could probably debate, but certainly the novelty has to be there. So a PhD is a longer engagement, nominally 3.5, often in engineering more like 4.5 years or 8. Whereas a master's you can usually be done within 2. So the master's is generally much more bounded and much more scoped. But by the end of a PhD, you could reasonably expect to be the world's leading expert on the topic you have chosen. That may be an extraordinarily specific topic. You may be the world's leading expert on the exact eye color of, one species of starling in one suburb, but you will be the world expert on that topic. And again, a master's simply doesn't come with that level of knowledge. So a PhD is a wonderful opportunity to just fixate on a very specific thing, learn everything there is to be learned about that, and hopefully find some way to make it useful to society. But the nature of science now, it is very specialized. All the low-hanging fruit are mostly, long since eaten. So you're generally doing something, many degrees of specialization. So why would you do a PhD as opposed to a master's? Well, only one of those requires people to call you doctor for the rest of your life. That's one aspect. But really, it's I think that fundamental difference comes down to the PhD is a novel and significant contribution. So in and of itself, there is an inherent contribution to the body of knowledge that may or may not exist in a master's by research. And then as a master's by coursework is really an entirely different consideration. It's just you want to learn more, so you learn more in a specific domain.
Darin, you look like you had something to add there.
Yeah, look, I think it's a really good question. And I agree with Daniel when he says that, if you're a PhD, you're really adding to the body of knowledge in a way that hasn't been done before. So you become a very important specialist. Now, I can just tell you from my experience at Boeing, the lead of my software team had a PhD in artificial intelligence, and he was awesome and fantastic at that. And we really wanted him to do that. But we didn't want everyone to have a PhD. We also wanted the rest of the team to have more broad skills. They didn't necessarily want to focus on one particular area or be the best in that area, so that we could move them around and sort of share the ability that they had. So it is important if you go down that PhD path from an industry perspective, you may be confining yourself to a path that is very specialized, and so you need to think hard and long about that, versus say being a bit more broad and accepting perhaps less specialization, but that you might be a little bit more usable in a general sense. So there are pros and cons to both. Have a think about that too.
You're muted, Megan.
Apologies. Thank you, Daniel. We have another question directed at you, Darin, which is what sort of opportunities at university would help someone such as a young engineer prepare for an officer selection board? I'm assuming this is a defence term.
Yeah, so from a defence perspective, I think the important thing to remember is, and I mentioned this at the start, that you're joining the profession of arms. So not only are they looking at you for your ability to do the work, if you're an engineer, then to be a proficient and skilled in that area, but also they're looking at you for the potential to lead as an officer. So that is an important distinction. So half of it is technical or proficiency in the degree stream, and the other half is your ability to command and to progress through the system. So they're really taking a long-term look, and you've got to have those attributes which suggest that you are able to be put in charge of people and to potentially put people in, I hate to use that American term, but in harm's way, because the buck stops with you. So there's those two aspects. Have a think about that. And be willing to answer questions about that, because it's not just the job, it's also the other part of the job, which is the profession of arms.
I think we've got one last question, which I'm hoping all of you will be able to answer, which is if you could kind of pitch your career path, what you love the most about it and what you think is the coolest about it, to our listeners. Could you do that in 30 seconds? And also if you could give them one thing to watch out for if they did happen to follow a similar career path to you. So we'll start with Seb and we'll go from there.
I think the biggest thing is don't be afraid to take risks. Get some experience under your belt if you can get experience under your belt. And if an opportunity comes by, take it. If it means that you might have to move state, take it. When you're young, at least like I've experienced this, the world, it's a very cliche thing to say, but the world is your oyster, and you are in charge of how far you get in your career, especially in the young years. And to quote my current manager, it is your responsibility to stay in the top 1%, or it's your responsibility to stay on top of your game. So never stop learning. If an opportunity comes by, just jump on it and see where it takes you.
Brock, do you want to jump in?
Yeah, sure. Sorry. So basically coming on from what Seb said, it's just, never say no. Make sure like you're young, you're keen to learn stuff, like you've just come out of university. So working with something like a startup or an SME or like any company where you're exposed to all these experience, where that culture is encouraged, just take advantage of it. Make sure that learning trajectory is super steep so you can take in as much information as possible, because that will keep you at your 1%, and enjoy it along the way too. That would just be my words.
Daniel, did you want to jump in?
Sure. So I guess the 30-second pitch for why I love what I do and why you might love it. You get to work with brilliant, passionate young people who are driven to improve the world and to change the world, who are always smarter than you, who are always willing to work harder than you and inspire you. And that's just a constant pleasure. And I suppose one of the beautiful things about academia is it's the freest job in the world. You have the most control of your own destiny. A couple of years back, I was sitting in a laboratory in Berlin where we were running experiments on a pulse detonation engine. And I hadn't had to get permission to be there. I was being paid my full salary to be there. I just decided that my job meant I should go and look at this experiment on the other side of the world, and I didn't have to answer to anyone. I just decided that's what my job is, and I'll do it. So it's beautiful in its freedom and in the people you get to work with. The downside, the thing to watch out for, I guess, is it's cutthroat and the work never, ever stops. People say my job's not a 9-to-5 job. Well, my wife and I spent the first 3 days of our honeymoon in Hawaii without leaving the hotel room because we were writing research grant applications. Academia never stops. You can't go on holiday from it. You can't go part-time from it because there will always be someone out there who you'll be competing with for the next round of grant funding who doesn't take breaks, doesn't have a life. So, but it's the best job in the world. If I could trade it in to be an astronaut today, I wouldn't do it.
That's a big call. Right.
I've thought long and hard about it, and I despite having wanted to do that my whole life, I do believe that day to day, I'll be happy doing this.
Exceptional. Fantastic. Imogen?
Yeah, I think I just reiterate what I said before. Think about the industry that you're interested in. For a lot of you on the line, it'll be aviation or space. And think about all of the different skills that you could add to that. When I was, working at Geoscience Australia, once you're on a space project, you've kind of got that bow. People can see that you're interested in space and that you're that you've got some of those core skills that you need. So you need to think about what are the other things that are going to come up in the future that I need to be ready for? What are some skills that I can add? And that's why I sort of moved into the cybersecurity aspects of that project, because it's going to be relevant to anything that I do in the future. So looking really broadly at all of those different skills. I'd say one of the downsides, and this is probably more for being a woman in this field, trust your gut. You will probably at some point in your career find yourself in a sticky situation, or find yourself doing, being in an organization with poor culture. So making sure that you've got these really broad skills so that you can jump and move and change at any point.
Very interesting advice. Thank you, Imogen. Cathy?
I think what everyone else has shared is really fantastic. I just would say, just don't have any regrets. Try everything. And we made the jokes about the goat before, but you will learn something from that. Don't stop learning. If you've stopped learning, it's time to move, and it is time to move on, whether that be in another project or another part of the business, or completely out into another organisation. That I would encourage that. I think to Imogen's point there, I work in a very male-dominated environment. So when I go into a meet or actually in a room, I'll probably be one of the only women. And which is, I'll tell you what, is great to see though. We are hiring more and more female grads into our engineering business, which is just tremendous. But don't let that put you off. And I think that it can be a bit off-putting. You'll look and say, wait a sec, I'm in the minority, or I'm from a very different background, a different cultural or ethnic background. That can be a bit daunting, but don't let that get in the way. Just put your big girl or big boy pants on and just go for it. No regrets.
Yeah, and I'd say that most organisations, particularly big ones like BAE, the APS Defence, all publicly talk about their gender and cold background plans. So make sure you look them up, have a read. If they don't have one, red flag.
Red flag, yeah, totally
really,
right.
really research the organisation that you're thinking of applying to.
Darin?
Thanks. What's been said, Daniel, I only did teaching for a short while, but marking was the bane of my life. And I don't know how you can stand there and say you enjoy that aspect, because marking other people's work, if it's a HD, easy. If it's a fail, easy. But if you're in the middle between the difference between a distinction and a credit, it's like, oh my god, it's a lot of work. So
fails aren't easy. Every fail makes you die a little. Right?
So yeah, academia, I found the hardest thing in my life, to be honest, career-wise, was actually marking other people's performance on a regular basis. But that said, in terms of career goals and things, I would just say this: life is not meant to be mindfully blissful. I think it's the deltas between feeling good and working hard and doing things that are difficult is what makes life what it is. So if you're out there just to cruise through life in some sort of numbed state, then you can do it in Australia. But I don't think it'll give you the rewards you're looking for. Take on challenges. And I just recommend looking at something, the Japanese term ikigai, which I think applies to a lot of areas that we're talking about in terms of space and things. But, if you can get that intersection between things that you're good at, things that you like, and if they match your values, then that's gold. That's the sweet spot. Really hard, but have a think about those things early. It's not just about the money.
Fantastic. All right, well, I think we might wrap up there. Thank you guys so much for coming along today. I think that was incredibly insightful, and I hope everyone at home got something out of it. If not, that you'll just be dreaming of goats tonight, but we don't know. Just so you guys know, Aerospace Futures Online is ongoing. We have 2 very exciting interviews coming up. So we have leading astrophysicist Alan Duffy coming up in September, and we will also be having Pamela Melroy, who is a retired astronaut from NASA, who currently works in Australia, live on the channel as well. So keep an eye out for that. It's going to be very exciting. And have a good evening.
Good luck,
Cheers.
everyone. Stay safe, and pleasure to meet you or to see you all again.